Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this portion, I will record the life experiences which led me to the realization that the European intellectual tradition has been built on fatally flawed foundations. In the first portion, I described how my faith told me that the wisdom of the Quran could not be matched by any human created knowledge, but my Western education taught me that there was no match to the excellence of knowledge created by the European intellectuals over the past few centuries. This led to a deep conflict between my head and heart, and I prayed to Allah Ta'ala to show me how faith would lead believers from darkness to light. In the second portion, I discussed Edward Said's book on Orientalism, in which he exposed the emptiness of an entire intellectual tradition of the West and showed that Western studies of the East were merely an expression of a superiority complex and not knowledge. This led me to the ambition of showing that modern economic theory is also a part of Orientalism, a way of showing the superiority of European ways of thinking and acting. In trying to reconcile modern economic theory with Islamic teachings, I came up with stark contradictions. On the one hand, economics taught me that humans follow mathematical laws, much like physical particles, but Islam taught me that humans are free to choose between good and evil. And the economics theory was based on a theory of human behavior which rejects God and judgment and says that the goal of life for all rational human beings is the maximization of pleasure. On the other hand, Islam teaches me that the goal of life is to choose good over evil. This led me to a stark choice. On the one hand, if I accepted that Western knowledge is as superior as it claims to be, then I would have no choice but to modify and distort Islamic teachings to fit into the Western framework. And this is the path which has been chosen by many Muslim intellectuals. On the other hand, if I said that no, the Quran is complete and perfect, then I would have to reject all of modern economic theory. And this also seemed very difficult because it's taught all over the world and it's used for policy making and rules the roost. Seeking guidance from Allah to lead me out of the darkness into the light, I was led to a mountain of evidence against the central theory of human behavior on which all of economics is founded. The economics say that every human being seeks to maximize pleasure, but this is contrary to what we observe about human behavior. Human beings sacrifice their lives for strangers. They are generous, they are kind, they are compassionate. All of these things are in contrast with the behavior that economics teaches us about human beings. There is, in fact, the evolutionary theory has been changed recently, and it has been learnt that generosity, cooperation, and social responsibility are built into human nature. And this is the opposite of what economics teaches, based on early forms of of evolutionary theory, which said that greed and competition and individualism and hedonism were built into human behavior. I tried to publish a paper with the mountain of evidence against this theory of human behavior, but I found that top journals were not interested. Economists do not like to be challenged by facts, and this has been noted by many leading economists. For example, most recently, Olivier Blanchard says that modern macro is based on theories which are profoundly at odds with what we know about human behavior. So economists are not interested in changing their theories to match the evidence. This led me to an even deeper question. Why do economists refuse to face facts? Why do they refuse to modify theories which fly in the face of empirical evidence? The conflict between the theory and the fact is childishly obvious. It's not that it's something difficult and complex. So, just as a side note to students, the first step towards knowledge is to learn to think about thinking. What shapes our thoughts? What shapes the thoughts of the economist? And this is a branch of epistemology, the theory of knowledge. And this is the central battle that we face, to understand what knowledge is and how it is created and shaped. With a little search, it's easy to find the reason why economists are comfortable with making crazy assumptions Milton Friedman introduced a methodology in which he said that the assumptions can be completely crazy, and the crazier the assumptions, the better your theory. So this is quite astonishing because obviously bad assumptions should lead to bad theory. So the question is, why did economists start to believe in this patently absurd methodology of Friedman? Understanding how economists came to believe in such a absurd methodology is quite difficult, and I will give a brief sketch of a very complex story. It begins with when Emperor Constantine wanted to unite all the different Christian factions, and he held the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and he created an official version of Christianity based on the Trinity, and he suppressed all dissent. So all other knowledges, anything which was different from or in conflict with Christianity official doctrine, was suppressed. And this is what created the Dark Ages of Europe. One more important thing was that the axiomatic method of reasoning was created to protect the Trinity from errors. The axiomatic method says that there are some statements which are unquestionable. They are out of the scope of argument, discussion, debate, and the rest of knowledge is built on these axioms. So once you put the Trinity inside the axioms, even an absurdity like 1 equals 3 cannot be questioned. After 7 centuries, the advanced civilization of Islamic Spain degenerated, and the people started valuing in luxury, ripening them for the reconquest, which gave Europeans access to the treasures of millions of books in the libraries of the Muslims. The translation project started in around 13th century, was the beginning of the rebirth of Europe because new knowledge started flowing in. Much of this knowledge was in conflict with traditional Christian doctrine, and this eventually led to the break of the church and extremely bloody war between different Christian factions. A century of bloody wars between Christian factions had a dramatic effect on the knowledge of the West. A century of bloody warfare had taught Europeans that religion, or actually Christianity, could not provide them with a basis for a society which was peaceful and harmonic, and so they needed to construct knowledge of politics, economics, and social sciences on the basis of new foundations without invoking Christianity. This led to the birth of secular knowledge, which was supposed to be based on reason. Reason was taken to be the name of the common assumptions, the shared assumptions of all Europeans across the different Christian factions, so that there could be consensus on this. And this is what is called the Age of Reason in the West. Having to reject centuries of scholastic tradition and the necessity of rebuilding knowledge from scratch led to a radical theory of knowledge which said that all knowledge must be based purely on observations and logic, and we cannot allow our intuitions and our feelings and our hearts and souls to play any role. That is because the trauma of loss of faith led the Europeans to say that since our heart has deceived us in the past by telling us that there is a God when there is none, so we must no longer trust our feelings. So David Hume reflects some of this passion against religion when he says that we should burn all books which don't contain abstract theoretical reasoning or experimental reasonings. Facts and logic were to be the sole sources of knowledge, and unobservables like God and judgment and angels, these had to be rejected very strongly. So basically the philosophy of science was invented to prove that science is the only path to reliable knowledge and religion is nothing but ignorance and superstition. And so the first problem that these philosophers faced was how to distinguish between science and religion. And there seems to be one obvious criteria. Religion relies centrally on unobservables like God and Day of Judgment and life after death and angels. And science deals with this world. So this world is observable. So the idea was that science is based or should be based on observables and religion is based on unobservables. So the key idea of the new theory of knowledge that started to emerge was that science should be based, or knowledge should be based only on facts and logic, things which can be publicly observed, and anything which is not based on facts and logic, things which we cannot observe like God, cannot be admitted into the body of knowledge. The problem was that the science itself was also based on unobservables like gravity and electrons and subatomic particles and many others. So this problem was occupied the philosophers of science for centuries until a solution to the problem emerged in the philosophy of logical positivism in the early 20th century. The key to logical positivism was to say that when science talks about unobservables, they're really talking about the observable manifestations. So for example, when you talk about gravity, you're really talking about the circular orbits of the planets which we can observe, which is a manifestation of gravity. So in this way, they hoped to remove all unobservables from science and prove that science was based purely on observables, while religion was based on unobservables, and so pure superstition and ignorance and not part of knowledge. So this rejection of unobservables was at the heart of the construction of knowledge in the early 20th century, and this had very grave and fatal consequences. In the next portion of this talk, we will explain how rejection of unobservables led to fatally flawed foundations for both economics and statistics and the social sciences in general. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.